Hello, Ro. I'm very excited to be talking with you today.
Hi, Joe. Really happy to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Not a problem. Tell me, who are you? Where are you from? And where are you based now?
Haha, it's a burning question. I've got five blood types in me. Born to mixed race parents in India, moved to Australia as a child, became an Australian citizen when I was 15. Um, that was in Brisbane, and then moved out to Sydney, where I met my now ex-husband, who was in the hotel industry. And shortly after that, shortly after we married, we started our expat journey. The first posting was supposed to be in Jerusalem, and then it was changed to Macau, and then it was changed to Auckland, and then it was changed to Nandi, and then finally it was changed to Melbourne, just a few thousand kilometers south of us. So we were there apparently only for 6 months, but 22 months later, with a 6-month-old baby in tow and 12 days notice, we went to England, our first stop. And then I can tell you where we went after that.
I would love to hear how thing. Well, I'm going to stop you there before you launch in because I know it's quite the
Okay.
roll call of countries and places. But I was very excited to talk to you because you are a I don't know seasoned like trailing spouse. I would love to sort of think, but I think as far as setting the scene, I just wanted to get my head square on where you were age and stage. So talk me through how old you were when the 4 or 5 false starts that were supposed to be the abroad experience where you moved from Sydney to Melbourne. How old would you
Um,
guys have been?
yeah, I was in my late 20s. We didn't have kids, and I had a great career with a video company, but they did not have an office I could go to in Melbourne. They would just had a sales office, and I was handling their publicity. So I had to give everything up. That was the first time
Mm.
I did that, to go down to Melbourne. And
And And so your husband worked in the hotel industry. Talk me through the sort of work, because I think that if we go into your roll call with a bit of an idea of the sort of work that he was doing, might give then people a bit of an indication of how long you were staying in each of these
sure,
places as well.
sure, sure. Well, he originally was in the food and beverage uh, part of operations, in the operational part of the hotel. And this particular hotel company um, were building hotels all over the world. And rather than have the, and because they just were hotel managers of properties, rather than have the owners of those hotels build and outfit the hotel, they chose to train their operational staff and technical services because they knew how a hotel was run. They
Got
knew
you.
what was needed. So my husband was trained in that and then shot up to project managers, manage hotels around the world. Hence, we went to quite a few places, quite a few, understatement, and lived at different periods of time through each of those moves, depending on what stage the hotel was when we arrived.
I see. So was it at different stages of the actual physical build, or was it in different stages of them being like, okay, we've been operating for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and the place is a mess and come in and fix it up? Or was it all in the actual physical build?
The building was built, so it just needed to be, the rooms need to be outfitted. We had to choose beds and curtains, and the restaurants needed flatware and cutlery, and uniforms needed to be designed. So the physical building was there, but he was there to make sure that the standard and branding of this hotel chain was permeated throughout
Got you.
the
Okay,
hotel.
got you. Right. Now, with that in mind, let's go. Talk us through. What year do we start? What year does this kick off in?
It was 1989. We were given 12 days notice to go to the first move. My daughter was just 6 months old. Had to sell
Mhm.
everything we owned in 12 days, arrange visas and holidays, and we got there. Sometimes you
Crazy.
wonder how you do things, but you know what? I think as a woman, you just get down and do it, and you don't think, how the heck did I do
100%.
that? You just do it.
A hundred percent. And
So I did.
I think about like we've left a country. We left Oz and moved to the UK in a relatively short. I think my husband was out within 2 weeks, and I stayed and had 2 more weeks of work, I think. So we did a pack up. We didn't have kids either at the time, but we did a pack up and turn around pretty quickly. It's quite funny though. When I landed, I was so unwell. I think, like, that you're running on whatever is left in your body as far as adrenaline, and then you land, and then you're just like, oh, I'm so unwell. Very much.
Then you allow yourself to be unwell.
Yes. But you did this in the late 80s, so this is like pre-internet. This is
pre-internet,
wow.
pre-mobile phones, nothing.
Wow.
And
Wow.
with a young baby, never been a mom before. That was fun. Going to a strange country, not knowing, no support, nothing. And
Yeah.
because we were the first people on the ground, there were no welcoming committee.
Yeah.
We were the first guys there. So
Yeah, so we're
internet,
first from Melbourne.
so Birmingham, England, and we were there about 13 months. And then we were supposed to go to Argentina. Same hotel company owned the one in Chile. So we were supposed to do both, but we ended up only being about a month in Argentina and across to Chile. And we were there till the hotel there was built in Santiago. After that, we went to Istanbul, to Turkey, which was interesting. A difficult and wonderful time. My hormones were raging because I was pregnant most of the time I was there with my second child. So we were there 2 years. I lost a baby and I had a baby there. Again, alone in a difficult country in terms of support. But you learn by this stage. I now was pretty good at this new thing, arriving without any support on the ground, nothing, and just making your way, just getting down and hunkering down and going, okay, you know what, we can do this thing. And also, you need to get out there in a very positive mindset. You have to have it, and if you don't have it, you have to develop it. More for your kids than anything else, but also for your own mental health. You have to treat everything like an adventure. Great. So before we go to a new country, as my kids were growing older and more understanding of what was happening, I would say, okay, let's go to the library because we didn't have internet. And I'd bring home all these coffee table books and we'd pour through them and go, wow, look at this country. Isn't it amazing? Look at the scenery. Look at the food or what it tastes like. Look at the people. Don't they look friendly? Don't they look warm? So I was the Pollyanna, sort of gearing everybody up for this exciting move that was ahead of us. So that's how we did it.
Okay, continue. I interrupted you halfway through your global traveling.
That's all right. After Istanbul, we swung by the US for about 3 months, and then we went to Mexico, and we had 2 locations there. Because the owning company was in one city and the hotel was in another. We ended up being there 2 years, and after that we went to Singapore. We were there about 13 months, and I left my husband then because it was just getting too hard. Not the expat life. I loved the expat life. My father moved around. I moved around a lot as a child. I sat down and I've moved home 61 times. That's as a child, and then elsewhere. So I'm a real nomad. I don't know what it's like to sit still. So the expat life suited me absolutely fine, but it was really hard without support. And as I said, we were always the first on the ground, so we were it. So we went back to Sydney for a year.
So how old were the kids at this? How old were the kids at this stage?
6 and 12 at that stage. Settled into Sydney, but then decided to reunite. So he was in Kathmandu at the time, so we joined him there. Loved Kathmandu with a passion. It's such a beautiful country, Nepal. Lived there 9 months because he was already halfway through the project, and then we went to Dubai. So from an exquisitely simple country to Dubai, imagine. It was just horrible. Though I must say, I loved the desert. The desert was fantastic. You really needed to debrief there. After Dubai, there was Ho Chi Minh City. We stayed there 2 years. And then finally Beijing, China. And that's when I pulled the plug and said, that's it. I mean, my kids were saying, who are we? Are we really Australian? Yeah. Have we lived? Oh, well, where's home? Okay, let me take you. Let me show you. So we
So how old were
repatriated
they?
in 2006.
Okay,
How old were
2006.
they?
Yeah, how old
15
were they then?
and 12.
Okay, so they got
No,
to do
16 and 12.
Okay, so they did some high school and, well, all of high school and some of high school in Oz. Okay. Did they reconnect, do you think? Do they feel Australian now?
Now they do. Now they're very
Yeah.
happy to be here. In fact, I actually got them to choose Melbourne. Well, I didn't get them to choose. When we left China, we flew first to Sydney and they met all their cousins and they looked at the beautiful harbour and I had a fabulous school for them there. And then I said, okay, let's drive down to Melbourne. And then we looked around and found some not as good schools. And then I turned to them and said, okay, you've been dragged around the block for the last 18 years. You choose. Where do you want to live? And they both said Melbourne. And I think it's possibly because they felt Melbourne has a more multicultural feel to it than Sydney, perhaps, and they felt more like they belonged here. Though later, of course, I found that the school that my daughter was admitted into recognized her IGCSEs. So she was allowed to skip a grade because we're talking between hemispheres. So, of course, they'd finished half a hemisphere. And all the other schools, the ones in Sydney, certainly were asking her to repeat a grade. And she was a really high academic standard. So it just was stupid. So anyway, the Melbourne school said, it's okay, we recognize it. So losing one entire year of school was a very good plus for her and a good reason to say, let's go to Melbourne, Mom.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thing that northern to southern or vice versa. We and especially even just with how the schools will like name the grades at school and stuff as well. So when we moved from Oz to Singapore, the kids had gone from a kinder to year 12 school and then into a 1 to 13, but they moved halfway through the year. So the kids my youngest went from having done 6 months of kindergarten into year 2. And then the one that was in year 2 went straight into year 4. And so they were telling everyone how smart they were, that they both just skipped year 1 and year 3 and just didn't do it at all.
That's funny. How hard it is when you're moving between hemispheres all the time. So that's why between them, my daughter went to 13 schools and my son 11. That was before they were 11 and 17. So 15. So it was hard for them. And that was one of the reasons why I just said, you know what, enough. But of course, the marriage was in a pretty shocking state at that stage anyway. It was a no-brainer to go.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, was around school. Did you so you obviously enrolled them each time, even in the places that you were there for 3 months?
Mm-hmm. I homeschooled in Mexico in the first location, only because my daughter was 4 years old, nearly 5. And the school, I put her in a local school because I always put the kids where I could when they were little in the local school so they could get friends. I mean, the whole object was socialization, not academics at that age. Who cares? But this particular school said, oh, her Spanish is not good enough. Whereas moms I met through the school said, oh my gosh, when she comes to our house, she's chattering away in Spanish with our kids because kids are like sponges with languages. So the school were being a little bit pedantic. So I said, stuff it, I'll homeschool you. So I homeschooled her while taking care of a little baby because my son was just about under a year at the time.
Mm. So what did it look like work-wise? Did you work at all along the way?
Because we were there such a short time. And I'd met him in a hotel and I loved the hotel industry. But of course, the moment you say you are with one brand, the other ones are not going to want you to work for them. And I didn't have a visa to work. He was the only one who got the working visa. I never got that. When we were in Dubai, I did. And we were there a substantial amount of time, meaning 3 years is substantial. So I was able to get part-time work there. And I enjoyed being in charge of my own finances for that brief period of time.
It's interesting because I've spoken to a few people that have moved around in the hotel industry, and I didn't realize that it is like that, isn't it? It's like you can't go and work for another brand if there's a spouse that's in one company. You can't go and work for one of the competitors. It's an interesting scene. Did you find that did you have your sort of own little crowd once the sort of hotels opened, when, you know, they were then bringing staff in and things? Was there a bit of a scene with the spouses of the hotel, or were you guys generally moving along by the time everyone else arrived?
I usually was the one to help out other hotel trailing spouses. This is where you go to buy stuff. This is where which medical clinic, you know, the usual. But I tended not to mix with hotel people. We had some wonderful hotel friends. I must say the ones that we had were absolutely wonderful. I guess the friends I made were more through the school, through the church, because we always hooked in with an evangelical English-speaking church, and through there you just get unbelievable treasure trove of nationalities of every kind. So I love the big expat mix. And even when in places where we live, we tried to live where the locals were rather than where the expats live, because we really wanted to have that fully immersive experience. So we had an amazing social life, largely because I went out there and looked for it. International associations, cultural associations. Gosh, there are people everywhere. You just need to put yourself out there to find them.
Oh my gosh, can you talk me through? I don't know if it sort of also though traumatizes to ask you to go through like either the mental headspace or the physical like list that you would write and execute before each move. Is there a go-to? I just sort of think whenever there's people that are bouncing around that regularly, they have got the packing and unpacking thing down pat. Did you just not have much stuff, or were you guys collectors of stuff?
We couldn't. Yeah, we couldn't take. We couldn't take it. We just weren't allowed to, and it was because it was such an erratic lifestyle. You really didn't want to be loaded down with furniture and things like that. So we just took our precious stuff, things like carpets that we had. We loved, because we rented a shell of a home, threw in whatever furniture, but what makes a home is the little touches, the paintings that you bring, the books that you bring, the carpets, special mementos that people have given you from where you left. So those little bits and pieces. So we had, I don't remember how much, I think it was very little, like 16 cubic meters, like one room worth of stuff we were allowed to bring for 4 people. That's kids and toys and stuff. So it wasn't much. It was great that we were in developing countries, because each time we had to get furniture. Sometimes we got leftover hired hotel furniture. And other times we would get a house rented with furniture. Sometimes we bought stuff, but because we were always in developing countries, it was wonderful because we were able to give it away. To our staff, to people we knew, to charities. We just learned to live with little, really. And it was great because you don't hoard. You just take what you need with you to the next place and get rid of everything. And then the next place you need to buy stuff, because you'd get there 3 months ahead of your shipment and you need to eat and you need to sleep on pillows and blankets and sheets. So you go out and buy all this stuff and then you give it away. And then you go to the next place and you buy stuff. So you're just doing that. So that's the only stuff that it would take 3 months for our stuff to arrive. And then when we traveled with the dog, that was fun, because then we had to worry about quarantine.
You put a dog in the mix?
Only later. The kids were desperate for a dog. They said, "Mommy, please buy us a dog." And I said, "We can't do that. It's not fair, because they've got to go through quarantine." And finally, when we were in Dubai, they said, "Well, we're here now for 3 years, so now can we get a dog?" So we did. And then that dog became the expat dog. It followed us to Vietnam, And then, well, it didn't go to China because we weren't there long enough. We left, I and the kids left after 4 months. And usually that would have been the time the dog would have spent getting through customs, because you weren't allowed to receive your dog until you got your visas, and that took quite a while. So we'd leave it with friends, and then they'd put the dog on the plane to us once we were ready. But when we were in Vietnam and we decided to come back to Australia, the poor thing was, because Australia's anti-rabies laws back then, she had to be in quarantine, I think, a total of 10 months. And when we eventually met her, she didn't know who we were. We were just like, who are you? She was more happy to see the kennel attendant than us. She completely forgot us. It was heartbreaking. That's another story.
We've just had a similar incident. I took the kids home, we only got back yesterday, took the kids home for the first time in nearly 2 years. And my eldest, who's 10, like, we went out, our dog has been living with my best friend, and the kids were so excited about seeing the dog, who just had absolutely no idea who they were. And my 10-year-old was like really upset, like crying, and he doesn't remember us. And of course my husband bowls in and the dog remembered him well and truly. But the kids were devastated. And I was like, yeah, but look how different you look. Look how grown up you are and all this. But yeah, that was yes, pretty tough. But I can only imagine, God, and I assume like the cost of moving the dogs around as well.
And especially the last one, moving him from Vietnam, because at the time Australia didn't accept, even though we'd only been there 2 years, and it was an American dog, vaccinated to the eyeballs. The Australian authorities said, you've been living in Vietnam and there's rabies there. So therefore you have to have your dog in quarantine for 6 months before you bring it here. Great, fine. And you have to take it to Singapore. Singapore was an approved country. But Singapore said, as you're coming from Vietnam, you've got to put it in quarantine for 3 months before it comes here. So it was just backed up. So by the time we eventually got her, it was 10 months in quarantine, cost a fortune. But I do remember, I think it was over $10,000. I remember when we arrived and we were all spinning out. It was a very traumatic return to Australia. And I just saw my kids with the dog and they were cuddling it and getting so much comfort. And I thought, you know what? It was worth it. The joy and peace and comfort that little dog gave our kids was so worth the whole thing. So, yeah.
So do you think that growing up bouncing around with you as the expat child, or the child bouncing around, do you think that it prepared you in any way to do the same thing as an adult yourself?
Oh, definitely. My dad was a great adventurer, and we moved. I mean, we left India to come to Australia. Well, I was a child, so I don't remember too much of it, but I know that a lot of us mixed race people were leaving India at the time. So the Indian government at the time said you can leave the country, but you can only take the equivalent of 10 Australian dollars with you per person. So our dad gave everything and arrived with, we had a lot of kids in our family. There were 10 people arrived with $100 in his pocket. This was when Australia opened up its doors to citizens from British Commonwealth countries. So that was India. But that's another story, too. So I think I was used to moving around. And also the identity was part of it, too. As a child, we were never fully Indian. We were never fully British. So we didn't belong there. So this feeling of not belonging and making home somewhere new was kind of in my DNA. So I guess that's why I really love the expat life. And to me, it was a huge adventure. Great. What can we do next? And my kids also felt that way. Just at a high school level, it gets hard. It gets really hard changing, because that's when your peers matter so much to you. And we were just ripping that away from them. We may have moved house when I was a child, but we stuck with the same school. We just moved within the area. It's a big difference when you're changing schools, changing countries.
I was
So it
about to
was
say
hard on them.
changing countries, changing cultures, changing, all of the things that go with it.
Curriculums, for goodness sake. Yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes it was the British system, sometimes it was the American system, sometimes it was the IB system, depending on what was available. You just went with what you had. Yeah. So
Mm.
I'm really proud how well they handled that.
Did you ever cross over with another individual or family anywhere? Did you ever cross over in
Remember,
multiple places?
it was funny when we lived in Singapore, because we try to keep up our Spanish, because we spent so many countries, uh, spent our lives in so many Spanish-speaking countries. So we decided to join a Latin association. There was this big Latin brawl, and we thought, let's go. And when we arrived, we realized we were the only non-Spanish speaking people there. They were all proper Spanish speaking people, and we felt like idiots because our Spanish was so bad. Anyway, this couple he was Italian, she was Mexican, and they felt sorry for us. So they came up to us and said, sit at our table. And then we got talking, and they said, so did you just arrive here? And we said, yes. And they said, where were you before that? And we said, Mexico. And they said, oh, so were we. Before Mexico, and we said, Turkey. And they said, yeah, so were we. Before that, we were in Chile. My gosh, we had never met anybody like that. So the whole time we were in Singapore, we were joking and saying, look, he worked for a pharmaceutical company. We said, look, when you know where you're going, tell us, because of course that's where we're going to go. And so at the end of our stay in Singapore, when I knew I was going to leave my husband, the hotel had said to him they will transfer him to India. So I was telling my friend this, I'm going to Australia, but he's going to India. And she said, you wouldn't believe it. You have just screwed things up because we have just been transferred to India. That was hilarious. So my husband went on, but that was changed. Sorry. So that was changed, and they sent him to Nepal. And I eventually, when I went to Nepal, we used to call her and say, look, we're kind of neighbors, so we're kind of in the same neighborhood. And then we heard we were going to Dubai. So I called her and said, guess what? We're going to Dubai. And she said, you will not believe it. They were going to Dubai as well. They are still in Dubai, by the way. So, but isn't that unbelievably coincidental? So
Yeah, that's
6 countries
crazy.
in the same order. Spooky,
Yeah.
even.
Yeah, but different industries. That's so random.
Yeah, that was really funny. So that was quite interesting. But we met so many interesting people like that, and still lifelong friends with all of them. And I was going to say about that. Have you heard of the expat time depth dilemma? In a normal situation, people who live regular lives, you get to know people over a period of time. You meet them at school, you meet them at sports fields, wherever, at work, and you slowly get to know them over a period of time. As an expat, you don't have that time. You're moving into a new country and you have to dive in deep. So instead of going, because if you waited all that time, you'd never have any friends. So you get down deep and dirty. So you dive right in and you get into the nitty gritty. You don't just talk about the weather and football teams. You say, how do you feel about this moving? How are your kids coping? How's your mental health? You get deep. And so as a result, especially in my case where I only had, I think the average was 18 months. You made a lot of really strong friends who knew far more about you than your family, than your friends back home, because you talked about the really nitty gritty stuff on a more intense level. So when you left, the goodness, horrible. I hated it. I would just weep. I would weep as the plane took off. I would weep as we landed in the new place. And in the new place, we'd find schools for the kids. My husband would go off to his hot and cold running office. My kids would be getting new friends at the school that was established and ready with other new students. And me, I'd be left at home in an empty house and all the memories and heartache of what went before. And I just weep and weep and weep. And then our stuff would arrive and all the gifts that people gave us when we left there, and I'd be crying. And this was again before the internet, before and when phone calls were terribly expensive. So that was the hard thing. It was the cost of making deep friendships. It cost you, but it was worth it, and I wouldn't have ever stopped it.
I haven't heard it. What did you refer to it as? The
It's
time
called the
and depth
time depth
dilemma.
dilemma. Yeah. Somebody wrote about it. I wrote about it on a blog in my Facebook Right Said Rose page. It's an expat thing. Third culture kids, you'd have heard about that expression. I think I may have got it from one of their blog posts. It's so true. It's so
Mm.
true.
I've heard, like, obviously talk about that quite regularly, but I haven't actually heard that concept around it name wise. I like that.
Mm.
Interesting. Do you reckon that you have any advice that you wish that you'd known when you got started?
Well, things I wish I'd known. I guess I would have, but it was hard then, get a portable career, especially in my case. So you have something that you're financially in charge of, that is your baby, because you just, as a trailing spouse, and I think a lot of people don't quite like that, but it really is. It is what it is. That's what you are. You're moving along. So I think to have a portable business, and I'm a writer for goodness sake, except I only realized that seriously after I'd come back. But I could have been doing something about that before. So yes, I would say get a portable business and get working on that, because you need to have something of your own. I also think that if you're in a really bad marriage, like I was, not a good idea, because each move was hoping things would be better in the next place. And the thing is, if it's not better where you are, buddy, it's not going to be better anywhere else. And we just had that hope constantly. Maybe it'll be better. You reinvent yourselves. You're in a new place. You've got something exciting. And it only works for the first while. Once you get into the mundane, which you hit quickly because you're used to doing this really well. It's hard. And then there was something else that I was going to say. Also, been something I wish I'd known. Yeah, just I guess it was just embracing where you are,
Mm.
really looking at it with open eyes. Go there with a sense of wonder and a sense of curiosity, and which I did. But I know I met a lot of people who were just so homesick, and they spend so much time hating being there. And I think you have to just say, I'm going to like it, and just make a conscious, intentional decision that you are going to like it. Because if you search for the good, you find it,
Oh, that's such a beautiful thing that I want to finish
even
there
in
so that
certain
we can.
places I've lived in.
Yeah, I bet. I think that I think that I find, well, like, just even listening to the amount and the variety of places that you've been is just fascinating. But I think I really appreciate you talking so candidly about it's also not all sunshine and rainbows as well, that it can be a really challenging way to do life, and that balancing up of the fun and excitement and like wow of all of these different places in the world. And it sounds very glamorous. Like, what if you reel that off to someone when you polish it up and sort of say like, oh, and we lived here and did this, and my kids speak Spanish and they speak all these other languages, and we've got friends from 300 different countries. Like, it all can sound very, very glamorous, but I really appreciate you sharing that, like, it can be pretty bloody hard behind the scenes as well.
It is, yeah, because you don't have that support. You don't. So
Mm.
although people would say, wow, you've got to live in hell. Yeah, but I haven't got my mom. I haven't got my sisters nearby. I haven't got my best friend nearby. So, and I spend half my life packing and the other half unpacking. So I don't do mundane things. I am looking for schools. I'm looking for houses. I'm looking for hospitals and clinics and grocery stores and where you can get imported goods and a safe place to take my kids here, and where will you buy clothes, and all these things over and over and over in every single country. So you only make that choice once when you're living at home. But we
Yeah.
were doing it all the time. So literally, I'd spend the first half of my life in the country unpacking and discovering, and the second half of the life in that country planning for the next country. So it was hard to live in the moment. Oh, you
Yeah.
did, but you didn't think about it. You just did it. So you're on the go. It's an exciting love style. And as I said, I'd go back in a heartbeat, but it's not easy. And sometimes my family had trouble coming to terms with that. They go, expat, spoiled expat, you had drivers, you had cooks, but all the other stuff we had to do, not easy.
Oh, Ro, it's been absolutely fascinating hearing what you've done over this time, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Joe.